With our freshly built SR20VE turbo engine now running on the dyno, it was time to put it through its paces and put a proper tune-up into the MoTeC M150 ECU. Once we'd done that, there was also the task of actually heading to the racetrack and testing out the car, making sure that nothing fell off and that everything worked how we expected, which it didn't. Let's find out what happened. Once we got on top of our boost control issue, refitting the seat to the wastegate, it was time to actually put the engine through its paces. And as we'd already discussed in a previous episode, one of the aspects with the setup that we're using was the ability to have multiple boost set points, and this allows us to adjust the power and torque that the engine's making depending on exactly how much power we need to be competitive. The idea with endurance racing, really, we want to be able to circulate with the minimum amount of power that we need to be class competitive, putting less stress and strain on the engine and also using less fuel. At the same time though, if we get into a situation where we're stuck behind a car that's faster than us in a straight line but is holding us up through the corners, then it's also nice to have enough power temporarily in order to get past that car down a long straight. So this is the beauty of a turbocharged engine. We've got that flexibility with the power delivery by manipulating our boost control. Using the set points, our multi-position switch on the steering wheel, we've got 5 boost maps, 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then a push to pass. With our minimum boost pressure sitting around about 10 to 11 psi, this gave us around about 385 to 390 horsepower at the wheels. Essentially what we did was step the boost up from that minimum of 10 psi up to 12, then up to 15, 18 and 20 psi, and then using our party mode push to pass, that took it up to 24 psi. So 385, 390 horsepower at the wheels on our minimum boost pressure, and essentially we just stepped up equally up to our maximum boost pressure in party mode at 24 psi, 593.5 horsepower at the wheels. So we felt that this gives us a pretty good spread of power and torque, and something that should be pretty usable. Hopefully the minimum boost pressure setting is going to also be suitable if we do end up on a wet track, so that's another consideration. We do have the flexibility there as well though to bring in multiple throttle mapping, so we can actually reduce the throttle position relative to the driver's foot pedal for a wet track. So that, coupled with the traction control, is something that we're going to need to dial in if and when we do end up racing on a wet track. And given the considerations we had around the power band as well, we found that with the Calford cams in the stock P11 Primera head, we're actually still making good power right out at 8800 RPM. In fact, the power is holding pretty flat there, so it gives us a power band that we can run out to 9000. Ultimately, it looks like the head probably wants to go a little bit beyond 9000 RPM. We might not see much more power there, but usually we want to be able to run the engine just a little bit beyond peak power. The idea there with our gearing and our shift points is we want to always be able to hold the engine as close to peak power as possible. So it's not actually the torque that's as critical as most people think. It's holding the engine up around that peak power level, or as close to as we can. That's going to make the car faster. The tune-up in it itself is nothing really particularly aggressive. Again, given that we aren't really trying to reinvent the wheel here, we're not aiming for world records, we just want good, reliable power out of this engine. So the idea here was to run it just a little bit fatter than it necessarily needed to be, so using a little bit of additional fuel for extra cooling, as well as a slightly more conservative ignition timing. We're not running the engine on the absolute edge, albeit with E85 at the boost pressures we are seeing, we're unlikely to be knock limited. So knock isn't a huge concern, but again, we're just giving a little bit of a safety buffer there compared to running the engine on the absolute edge. With the tune on the dyno complete, we really only had one thing left to do, which was head to the racetrack and put it through its paces and see if everything that we saw on the dyno checked out in the real world. We've just had our first test session at the racetrack. Actually, make that our second test session. The first one was cut pretty short with an ABS fault, so there wasn't really a lot we could learn. This time we had a better chance to really test the car and see where it's at. A few systems checks, making sure that the engine wasn't overheating, making sure basically nothing fell off. So ticked that box and went out and did a couple of push laps. Not really anything at full pace just yet, but the car is fast, definitely significantly faster than the V8, which goes without saying. You can also tell the power band, obviously with the V8, relatively flat power delivery through the rev range. Here we've got something that comes on boost, so it's all about learning the car again, learning the braking points, learning what gear to be in at what point of the track. And I mean, even with the V8, we haven't driven this particular car for a long time. That being said, everything looks like it's going to work out pretty well. We did end up having a small water leak from a water fitting on the turbocharger, so that sort of cut our testing short. We're just about to bolt on some Michelins and go out and do a few push laps and really see what it could do. But yeah, it was cut short, so whether or not we can get back to the track before the first round remains to be seen. It's now Monday. Track's closed Tuesday, Wednesday. We've got Thursday, the track is open, and then Friday we're testing, or we're practice day for our first race meeting. So it may be that we don't get to hit the track again. So it's going to be a pretty steep learning curve when we get to Teretonga. A couple of other things that we were working through here. The boost control, as usual, needed a little bit of tweaking compared to what I was seeing on the dyno, and that's something I'm going to be working through. I'm actually going to go back on the dyno because up to this point we haven't used closed loop boost control. Basically it was just using an open loop table, which is my usual technique. I'll get that sorted out before I actually enable closed loop control. The reason we do that is the closer the feed forward or base duty cycle table is to get to our target boost pressure, the less work the closed loop control then needs to do, and when it doesn't need to do much work, it does a better job. So this is something that a lot of people overlook. So dialed in the feed forward table, but there is quite often a difference between those feed forward or base duty cycle numbers that we need on the dyno under a steady state acceleration compared to what we see on the track, where the rate of acceleration changes depending on the gear and also as the car comes up on boost. So it only really gets us in the ballpark, and from there it's a bit of tweaking. So I did enable closed loop control using some parameters that should have got me in the ballpark, but with the fact that I needed to change the feed forward table numbers as well, ended up with some oscillations in the boost. So to make things easy for us, given that we had a limited testing time, I simply disabled that. Another thing we're noticing here on the track is our oil pressure was dropping off a little bit as the VVL switches in. So VVL is essentially Nissan's version of Honda's VTEC, and it uses oil pressure to switch to the high load cam. So obviously this does use more oil volume, so we expect to see an oil pressure drop, but we're getting down to around 55 to 60 psi at around about 6700 RPM where it does switch in. So it's a little bit lower than I'd like. One of the reasons for that is we have changed the oil from when we were on the dyno. On the dyno for running in, I use a good quality mineral based oil. Now we've changed to a full synthetic now that we've actually got the engine run in, and we've got a slightly different grade as well. So the good thing with the dry sump system is the pump has an adjustable relief valve, so we can actually wind that in and raise the overall oil pressure. Generally I like to aim for around about 10 psi per 1000 RPM, so up in the meat of the power band between sort of 7 and 9000 RPM. I'd like to see sort of somewhere between maybe 75 and 85 psi there or thereabouts. That's going to be something that'll keep me pretty happy. So a little bit of work to do there. I think all things considered though, it's definitely going to be a fast car. Test was a success. We're looking reasonably good for racing at the end of the week. Given that our testing was cut short and we had Thursday available for our last ditch effort before we loaded up and headed to Teretonga, the team collectively made the decision that a little bit more testing time was going to be in our benefit. So we headed to Highlands and put the car through its paces. We had initially a problem again with overheating, which we put down to an issue with the thermostat not opening. We found this because while the engine temperature was sky high, somewhere around about 120 degrees C, we stopped the car on track because of this. At that time, the radiator was actually pretty well stone cold, so this indicates that we weren't getting flow through the radiator. So temporarily we cut the centre out of the thermostat. Definitely not our preferred option, but when you're at the track and you need to do some more testing, well, you do what you can do. It's important to note here that just removing the thermostat can actually do more harm than good, because usually if you have nothing in the way of the flow at all, you've got nothing to restrict the water flow, and this can end up with the water basically flowing through the engine too fast where it can't actually do its job. So anyway, different story for a different time. That did appear to fix the issue. I went out on the track and did a handful of pretty fast laps, and the car is an absolute rocket ship. Ben went out and did some laps after me, and initially everything appeared okay. On his in-lap, we noticed that the engine temperature spiked up, but wasn't really too concerned about that. We put it down at the time to the fact that with the slower road speed, the airflow through the cooling system was reduced. So we loaded up and headed back to the workshop, and it wasn't until about 11 o'clock at night that the boys in the video crew were reviewing some footage, and they'd actually sneakily placed a GoPro inside of the engine bay pointing at the turbocharger. That, unfortunately, at 11 o'clock at night revealed that we potentially had a pretty significant problem.
Fuck, that is a lot. So it's 11 PM the night before we're supposed to be packed up, and with guys out there putting the final touches on the car and getting everything packed away, and Luke shows us this video that he put his put a GoPro underneath the bonnet, and it looks like we captured something pretty nasty. It's a whole bunch of water shooting out the overflow over here. The track was closing, so we had to chuck the car on the trailer straight after a session. We didn't check under the bonnet, we didn't check anything, we kind of just chucked it on the trailer and came home to pack up. Probably if we opened the bonnet we would have seen a bunch of coolant. Well, there's actually no evidence because we'd just changed the thermostat and we put new water in and it had no coolant in it, so all of the evidence had evaporated by the time we got to the workshop. Only to see this footage here when we returned, which is pretty gutting because everything else had been going so incredibly well. And from my experience with the Evo drag cars we used to run, like once a car is lifted ahead, it's pretty unlikely that things are going to be gravy. We had a few saves where we were able to re-torque the head down, and that helped, but it's just not what you want to see, and definitely not what you want to see a day before you're supposed to be going racing. Saying that though, tomorrow is practice. Qualifying is on Saturday morning, so we've got all day tomorrow to perhaps pull the head off, check out what's going on, and then you know, hopefully we can make it all work for the weekend, which would be nice because everyone's worked pretty hard and some long hours to get to where we are right now. Yeah, I'm not stoked, but these are things that you just have to deal with when you're building cars that go really fast. It's the first outing for this engine that we've put some sort of boost into it. So I guess you just got to take it. The fact that we were able to get an SR20 in the hole in place of the 1UZFE that I blew up at Tiratonga in such a short space of time is phenomenal, and everyone here has been pushing crazy weeks to get that done.
So why would a head gasket cause that to spray out all the water?
So what happens is that the combustion pressure lifts the head off the block, basically. And then the combustion pressure leaks between the head and the block. And it goes into the water jacket. And then the pressure in the water jacket is more than the radiator cap can handle. So it lifts the radiator cap and it sprays out the overflow.
Yeah, that seems pretty
Are there
cool.
any other alternatives of what that could be? Like not the right radiator cap?
Nah, that's the hopes and dreams of someone with a lifted head. I mean, you can get that sort of circumstance if you've got an airlock potentially and the cooling system boils, but that's not very likely after we've just done 20 odd laps.
Could we pull the cams out and torque down the head?
I mean, if it's already lifted the head, probably it won't do anything because it damages the head gasket. But I mean, it's worth a crack.
And like that, if the water was topped up, could we finish a race? No. Because it would overheat.
Well, it just sprays all the water straight back out, and yeah, it overheats. And then at the same time, it ends up destroying the cylinder head in the block.
Yeah.
So there's not really a lot good comes from that.
And how long does it take to do the cams? Pull the cams and torque down the head? Fucking while away.
It's a while. Yeah.
It's not a job for 11 o'clock.
I am not doing it now. I'm going to go to bed.
You look shattered.
Yeah, it'd be a couple of hours work. What boost map were you on? When to? That should be fine.
Did you? Because you did get that second engine hot warning, didn't you? Or?
Yeah, you did, eh?
Yeah. I wonder when that was. Was that on that last lap?
That was on that last lap, and I didn't bring it in. Like, it did start to go straight down, though. It wasn't like it didn't go up.
Yeah.
And then just keep on going up. It went up and then came down, and then, because you said go faster.
Yeah, well, it does
Well,
seem
that's
the
a road
cooling seems quite sensitive to airspeed, or road speed, airspeed.
Why, there was nothing really to instigate that, eh? Because, like, it all felt good.
It wouldn't
And it was
show
going
heat,
hard.
it would just be more pressure.
What do you mean, sorry?
Like, the reason it blew out is because there's more pressure in the system, not because it's hot.
Nah, the sort of the overheating is a result, not a cause. Yeah, I mean, it's not really what I wanted to see at 11 o'clock at night before we're going to go testing. But it is what it is. That engine was built with ample time frame, months, like 12 months ago.
Oh, yeah.
So no.
No.
Nothing about the time frame has affected that.
But if we had another week now, that would be handy.
Yeah.
Which we do till round 2, so there's a chance that that has damaged the head or block or both. You really don't know until you get in there and check out what's going on. If it has done irreversible damage, she's going to be tight turnaround between the next round for sure. So, yeah.
What time are we?
6 a.m. depart.
So 5:30 here.
Yeah, I think you probably go 5:45. Like, we're all packed up and ready to roll. Like, Jimmy is going to arrive with coffees and breakfast at 6 a.m. on the dot because of when the breakfast place opens.
Yes, please. Alright, I'll see you guys tomorrow morning.
Just 7 hours.
That's ample. I need more than that.
It's more than what you've been getting for the last couple of weeks.
More than that's wasted.
See you, man.
Yeah.
When you think we're going to be able to get it fixed before this weekend's race?
Let's go 60-40, just because I'm a optimist.
60 we will.
60 we will be racing, and it will be mean. 40% we're having a scenic tour of Invercargill.
If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you give us a thumbs up, and if you've got questions on anything that we talked about, you can ask those in the comments. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please make sure you do so. This way you won't miss out on any future episodes. And speaking of future episodes, in our next episode, we finally head to the racetrack to put the car through its paces at the first round of the South Island Endurance Racing Championship. This is what we've been working for the last 4 weeks. There's been a lot of blood, sweat and tears gone into this car, and there's a lot of hopes hinged on the result. Will we make the finish line? Will we make the podium? Will we make the start line? Watch along and you'll find out.